Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session and we'll try to get them answered online. We are particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Let me turn over the reins to Jason to begin today's discussion.
Welcome to the discussion. My guests are Denise Anderson, the Executive Director of the National Health Information Sharing and Analysis Center, Karen Evans, the National Director of the U.S. Cyber Challenge, Brad Nix, the Deputy Director of the Homeland Security Department's U.S. CERT, Todd Radcliffe, the Section Chief of the Cyber Operations Division for the FBI, and Jerry Goodwin, the Chief Operating Officer of the Government Systems Group of Viasat. Welcome to the show today. Before we get started, let me set a little context to our discussion. What a perfect time to talk about cyber threat information sharing. With the Senate's passage of the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act in October, there's finally what I'll call a bright light at the end of this long cyber legislation tunnel. While CISA doesn't do everything right, doesn't solve all the problems, supporters say it is a major step in the right direction. The bill, while it still needs to go through a conference committee and to deal with the Senate and House differences in their versions, does several things, including authorizing DHS to create a portal to accept cyber threat indicators and defensive measures from any entity in real time. CISA also takes on the first whack at liability protections for industry. Now, at the same time, CISA is not the beginning of threat intelligence sharing for cybersecurity. It's more like, I'll call it a turbo boost for an already fast car engine. The Homeland Security Department's National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, the NCIC, has been working with industry and sharing information for several years. DoD, DHS has had several different programs with their industrial bases to share cybersecurity threat data. And cybersecurity threat information sharing obviously is happening at other places around the government beyond DHS and DoD. The FBI plays a huge role with its iGuardian program. And recently, the FBI issued a sources sought notice for its National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, asking for vendor input around its threat intelligence platform. And of course, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, the CTIC, hit initial operating capability earlier this month in October. So the goal there is to improve the internal government threat sharing. There's plenty of other examples as well: energy, commerce, and of course the intelligence community. Even with all this activity around cyber threat sharing, few would argue with the fact that more needs to be done. The threats have become more sophisticated, more voluminous, and the need to understand what's happening on networks and in systems and then share that with others can't be understated. And that's what we're here to talk about today. How does the government and industry move faster, move better, and of course more exact when it comes to information sharing? And what does information sharing success looks like? And how best to overcome longstanding challenges that have stood in the way of real-time cyber threat sharing? Again, my guests are Denise Anderson, the Executive Director of the National Health Information Sharing and Analysis Center, Karen Evans, the National Director of the U.S. Cyber Challenge, Brad Nix, the Deputy Director of Homeland Security Department's U.S. CERT, Todd Radcliffe, the Section Chief of the Cyber Operations Division for FBI, and Jerry Goodwin, the Chief Operating Officer of the Government Systems Group at Viasat. Let me turn to Brad to start, since we'll put you on the hot seat. When we talk about cyber threat sharing, monitoring, intelligence, understanding your risks, give us a sense of what U.S. CERT is doing in that area.
Well, Jason, I think that one of the things that we need to remember is that, and I think one of the things that we've experienced over the course of the last few months and years is that a determined adversary will eventually get into a system. We need to shift our thinking, though, from relying solely on waiting for that to happen and monitoring for that to happen, and making it more geared towards identifying what our network traffic really is supposed to look like in normal circumstances, so we can have a better feel for what's happening when an attack actually occurs. You've got to keep in mind that when you're talking about threat is part of the risk equation, along with vulnerabilities as well as consequences. So I think that over the course of the last few years, we put a lot of effort into addressing our vulnerabilities and looking at our vulnerabilities. And I think as we continue to discuss, one of the points that I want to make is where we can actually provide a little bit more, where we can do a little bit more work in that area. But as it relates to threats, I think that we really need to do a much better job of taking a look at risk management as a fundamental part of the planning, preparing, and the execution of our organizational missions. And that's very important to me, both as the Deputy Director of U.S. CERT as well as a past CISO. We need to stop thinking about our CISO organizations as being an IT part of an IT organization and start thinking more about them being part of the overall enterprise mission and how we're addressing risk at the mission level.
A couple things there that are really important. You said move out of IT in terms of just cybersecurity, but part of enterprise risk. Denise, let me turn to you as working in the health industry and working for the ISAC that helps the healthcare companies. Is that happening? Is risk being moved out of just the IT shop?
Risk is definitely a part of the equation. When enterprises are looking at it, part of the goal of information sharing really is to make sure that you're able to inform risk-based decisions. And we're seeing a lot of enterprises. I actually have a background in finance with the Financial Services ISAC before I came over to National Health. And many in finance who were way ahead of the curve of many of the other sectors were already starting to have the departments report to a chief risk officer. So they're already moving in that direction where they're looking at that as a factor.
The CRO, I'm going to turn to Karen on this one and put you on one of your many hats that you wear. Where's your OMB hat? If you can pull that one out real quick for me. Chief Risk Officer Dave Mader, the acting Deputy Director for Management, talks about this Chief Risk Officer. He's not sure every agency needs one, but from your perspective, your experience, where does the CRO fits in when we talk about cyber threat and intelligence sharing and risk management?
I think if you take a look at risk as a whole and you're looking at the enterprise, it would make sense to move more to a chief risk officer type from a strategic standpoint, because you're looking at the agency's information holdings, what would be the risk, assess the risk, what would be the proper controls, so that you could get out ahead of the threat. I would like to address something that Brad said earlier, which is that I do not believe that the CISO should be taken out of the IT organization. And the reason why is because if you move to a chief risk officer type of approach, then that's more the strategic vision for the enterprise, and then you need an operational aspect that actually implements what the controls need to be, and that would have to go hand in hand with the chief information officer. So you would need the chief information security officer, the chief information officer, both of those components together, because you're using information technology from an operational perspective to address those risk controls.
Brad, if this was a debate for the presidential, we'd give you 30 seconds, but I'm moving to Todd instead on this one. And if you want to...
I'll give my 30 seconds.
Maybe. Todd, let's move back to cyber threat information sharing. I don't want to take us down the path of a chief risk officer too much, but from your perspective, what the FBI is doing, where do you see the threat intelligence progressing, and how has it progressed?
I think within the FBI itself, we have the dual role. We are the primary domestic intelligence agency for the United States, and then also for over the past 100 years, we have been the chief investigative group. So we wear two hats from that standpoint, and we have the ability to investigate these cyber intrusions, the cyber crimes, and then we also have the ability to collect intelligence. So through that, it's really more of a lean forward in response to Executive Order 13636, where they had mandated all government agencies to start sharing information better, faster, higher quality information. So in direct support of that, that's what we have been doing through many different avenues that we have. Joint intelligence bulletins we send out with DHS. We work very closely with Bradley's group. So our information sharing is not just within the government, but it's also with the different ISACs, the different communities. And what we like to say is not only can we provide information and intelligence, but we can to the corporations, but we can also provide some contents behind that context, as far as here's who we think may be doing this, here's why, here's what they're looking for, and here's how. So through the investigation mixed with our intel, we like to try to paint a picture, and I think that's what we're trying to do now forward is paint that picture. It's one thing to tell a corporation or an agency you're being targeted or they're looking at you, but having the ability to also now share with them why and who, that just paints a much better picture than just giving them some technical indicators.
I want to move to Jerry, but real quick follow-up for Todd. When you talk about the sharing of bulletins and the executive order that you mentioned, which is impressive that you know the number, by the way, because most of the time we just know the title of the executive order. Has that ramped up what the FBI is doing, or were you on that upswing anyways, and that just kind of give you a little more push?
I think it's went hand in hand. The last 2 or 3 years, we've really pushed to get information out. We've done countless briefings to corporations. We also like to, when we're doing the briefs, we like to go through industry segments. We like to go to the right sector at first. And so what we do is we not only go to the sectors, but we try to go through the ISACs. We try to go through whoever the industry leader is in that group to hit one location and get the word out to multiple people at one time. So we've been painting those pictures in our briefings to reach out to as many people within individual sectors at a time.
And the executive order just kind of gave you a little more momentum because obviously it's not a switch. You don't turn it on and off. You don't just begin doing those.
Correct. No, it's been something that had been called for a long time, and we had also, seen a need to provide more color to what we're telling the victims.
Let me turn to Jerry from Viasat. Give me a sense of what you're seeing in the community, public sector, private sector. What are some of the challenges around risk and intelligence sharing, and how much has it progressed?
Well, so, from an industry perspective, we've got multiple things going on. Viasat is a network service provider, so we have kind of an angle for that, protecting our customers, if you will. And then we're a defense contractor, so we have certainly threats, people trying to get information from us. So that's another aspect of our business. And then as just a commercial business, we have a security business that is more generically trying to protect customers. So we're kind of involved in this in multiple different ways. And so from the perspective of, say, our own enterprise, certainly, it's the same battle that any company is going under. So having more information about the threats, being able to, we're involved in like the OASIS stuff with the standards for threat intelligence sharing, but we really haven't. It's not really going yet in terms of the flow of information. The standards still being established, and that would be really helpful. The CISO legislation is promising because as an internet service provider, we certainly can observe things, but also just trying to figure out how to protect our customers. It would be great to have, say, a real-time threat feed that was of high quality that we could somehow figure out how to deploy into our infrastructure for rapid protection. Those kinds of things are really interesting, and the battle's difficult. So this kind of thing could really maybe make a difference. And so it's good to see it moving in this direction, and we certainly need the help.
Karen.
Well, I would say that a lot of the information sharing happens informally. That's the reason why the ISACs really work well, because they trust each other and the informal information sharing goes forward. But what you're really talking about, and what I think the legislation gives us a handle on, is trying to really move the entire ecosystem from a reactive type of environment to a proactive environment. When you start sharing threat intelligence information, when you start sharing what the threats are there, then you can start taking a more proactive approach based on the type of environment that you have and what they're seeing across the landscape. So you don't have to wait for it to happen to you. You can take preventative measures going forward. And I think the legislation is really trying to push the ecosystem in a way that makes it a more proactive type of environment.
Brad, jump in.
Yeah. So, and just a little bit of expectation on top of expectation setting on top of that, because within DHS, I know that it's understood that we're in the process right now of implementing the automated indicator sharing system and program, and it's important to understand, and this kind of speaks to Todd's point about context. That automated indicator sharing, if it's happening at real time, you're not always going to have the context behind that information. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and I say this because I think some executives get this sense that automated indicator sharing is sort of the end all be all, it's the panacea of where we want to be, but you still have to apply resources and efforts to understanding context behind that, because you can't just block everything.
Denise.
I was going to say, I think it's a combination of both. I don't think the human analyst is ever going to go away, but the machine-to-machine sharing definitely is one tool in the toolbox. And industry's actually been very forward-leaning on this. As I mentioned, I had history with the FSISAC, where I was for almost 9 years, and they were very instrumental in developing the capability to use Stix and Taxi in their platform called Sultra. And National Health ISAC was actually a very early adopter of that. So that sharing, we've been working with DHS and with this CISP program to get the indicators, but it is one tool. It just helps you be aware of what's hitting your perimeter. And then there's things where you can peer network and see what's happening to your peers, the duration, severity, and all that kind of stuff. That's very interesting and good to know, but the human to human is never going to go away.
I don't think anyone thinks humans is going to go away. I think there's always, I mean, if you look in the intelligence community, in many ways, in the way they collect and they analyze, there's always that person there. The goal, is it getting easier, though, or are you getting information overload from the ISAC perspective?
So certainly there could be a little bit of that, but I think it's learning how to manage the information. And I think the machine-to-machine sharing helps that to some extent because it cuts away some of the noise and allows the human analysts to focus on what's really important. So I think to some extent that's going to help.
Todd, do you get a sense that the noise is being, are you guys at the FBI able to filter out some of that noise that Denise was talking about?
Well, one thing I wanted to comment was unrelated to the legislation. Even before that, one thing you'll see is as you share more indicators, each group company, it's incumbent on them to look at that and how they're going to handle that those indicators. And there's not going to be as much emphasis placed on those indicators at every company. Some are going to be smaller, medium. They're not going to have the ability, the time to do so. So the emphasis on the companies will also that weighs into the factor of how all the sharing that we're doing right now even is effective or not.
And Jerry, real quick, about 30 seconds, react a little bit to what Todd said. How much does that play into it? Because each company is a little different and can only handle so much.
Yeah, I think, as a company, your mission isn't the reason you exist isn't to stop cyber attacks. So you have these other things that you're trying to do. So it is actually pretty challenging. I think there is a lot of noise. If you look at our IT department, they're really busy. They're very overburdened with what's going on. Everything from incident response to just trying to keep the network configured right and keeping people from doing dumb things that they do. On the ISP side, we're really just getting into, could we make this network safer for other people, for our customers? And there's some value there. And I think that's where we're looking to kind of, figure out how to do that.
I know Brad wants to jump in, but we're going to take a quick break. Brad, hold that thought. When we come back, you can start us off. You're listening to the panel discussion, Information Sharing from Compliance to Defense, sponsored by Viasat on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.